There are many kinds of knowledge that promise advantage in life. People study business, strategy, leadership, productivity, negotiation, communication, and success. They learn systems, techniques, and frameworks in the hope of making better decisions and navigating the world more effectively. But Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature makes a more foundational claim. Before any of those subjects can be mastered well, we must understand people. We must understand what drives them, distorts them, motivates them, threatens them, and blinds them. Most conflict, disappointment, self-sabotage, betrayal, manipulation, and failed judgment comes not from lack of technical skill, but from misunderstanding human nature. Greene's book is an ambitious attempt to correct that misunderstanding. Its central message is that people are shaped by deep and recurring psychological forces, many of which remain hidden even from themselves. They believe they are acting rationally, morally, and consistently, yet they are often pushed by emotion, insecurity, status concerns, envy, ego, fear, resentment, and unconscious habits. This is not just true of others. It is true of us. That is what gives the book its power. It is not merely a guide to reading difficult people. It is also a challenge to confront the forces operating inside our own personality. Greene asks the reader to become a more careful observer of the human animal, not with cold detachment alone, but with disciplined realism. If we do not understand human nature, he suggests, we will be controlled by it, in ourselves and in everyone around us. If we do understand it, even imperfectly, we gain something rare and valuable, perspective. And perspective, in Greene's world, is a form of power. At the heart of the laws of human nature is a fundamental psychological claim. Human beings like to think of themselves as rational, but much of their behavior is driven by emotion first and explained by reason later. Greene returns to this point again and again because it changes how we interpret almost everything. Arguments that appear to be about principle may be fueled by wounded pride. Decisions that seem strategic may be driven by insecurity. Moral postures may conceal envy. Grand ambitions may hide a fragile ego. The stories people tell about why they act are often incomplete or misleading, not always because they are consciously lying, but because they do not fully know themselves. This matters because life is full of errors caused by taking stated reasons too literally. Greene wants readers to look underneath the surface. Not to dismiss all explanations, but to notice emotional undercurrents. What fear is active here? What status concern? What hidden resentment? What need for validation? When we stop assuming that reason is the main engine of behavior, people become more legible. Their contradictions make more sense. Their sudden reversals make more sense. Their defensiveness makes more sense. Their strange overreactions make more sense. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it explains it more deeply. Greene's broader point is that if we want to understand human beings accurately, we must stop imagining them as stable, rational actors. We must learn to read them as emotional creatures who are constantly justifying, disguising, and managing impulses they only partly recognize. One of the first and most important laws Greene explores is irrationality. He argues that the greatest danger to judgment is emotional reactivity. People often believe they are thinking clearly in moments when emotion has already taken over the process. Anger narrows perspective. Excitement leads to overconfidence. Fear exaggerates threat. Insecurity distorts interpretation. Humiliation demands revenge. In these states, the mind becomes a servant to mood. It searches for justification rather than truth. Greene treats this as one of the primary facts of human nature. We are most easily manipulated, most likely to self-destruct, and most prone to error when emotion is driving from the shadows. His response is not to become emotionally dead. It is to cultivate distance. The mature person learns to pause, observe, and delay reaction. They understand that the first impulse is often not the wisest guide. This is a deeply practical principle. A single emotional overreaction can destroy a relationship, a career opportunity, a reputation, or a strategic position. Greene's advice is to treat moods as weather systems passing through consciousness, not as reliable commands. Emotional awareness becomes a form of defense. The more quickly we can recognize that we are angry, inflated, anxious, or defensive, the less likely we are to turn that state into action we later regret. In Greene's framework, self-control is not repression. It is freedom from being ruled by temporary storms. A book about human nature can easily become a book about other people. Greene refuses to let the reader stay there. One of his strongest themes is that the same traits we diagnose in others operate within us as well. Narcissism, defensiveness, self-deception, envy, status sensitivity, and the tendency to rationalize are not distant flaws. They are ordinary parts of human psychology. This is why self-awareness becomes so central in the book. Without it, knowledge of human nature turns into superiority. With it, the book becomes transformative. Greene urges readers to observe their own patterns as if they were studying another person. What kinds of criticism produce immediate defensiveness? What situations stir envy? What repeated emotional triggers distort judgment? What self-image are we protecting at all costs? These questions are uncomfortable, but Greene sees discomfort as the price of real growth. People who refuse to see themselves clearly remain under the control of forces they imagine they have mastered. They become predictable to others while staying opaque to themselves. Self-awareness interrupts this pattern. It introduces a reflective space between impulse and action. It weakens the hold of false narratives. It allows a person to see that what felt like principle may actually have been pride, what felt like righteous anger may have been wounded ego, and what felt like certainty may have been fear. Greene's larger point is uncompromising. The first person we must learn to read accurately is ourselves. Greene treats narcissism not as an extreme diagnosis applying only to a few dramatic personalities, but as a human baseline. We all experience life from the center of our own needs, wounds, memories, and desires. We are naturally drawn toward self-concern. The problem arises when this self-focus hardens into a chronic inability to see others as real and separate. Then relationships become instruments, conversations become self-referential, and empathy collapses. Greene is especially interested in how ordinary narcissism distorts judgment. People interpret events mainly in terms of how they affect them. They assume greater attention from others than actually exists. They take disagreement personally. They mistake their perspective for reality. This makes them difficult to teach, difficult to correct, and difficult to truly connect with. Greene's answer is empathy, but not in a sentimental sense. Empathy is strategic. It is the capacity to enter another person's emotional world, to understand their motives, their wounds, and their perspective without immediately filtering everything through oneself. This creates practical advantages. It allows better prediction of behavior, better timing, better communication, and fewer unnecessary clashes. More importantly, it loosens the prison of self-absorption. Greene's vision is not that we can become perfectly selfless. It is that we can become less trapped in the endless distortions of ego. And that shift, for him, is one of the marks of maturity. Another major theme in the laws of human nature is that people rarely present themselves directly. They wear masks. These masks are shaped by what they want from the social world: approval, trust, authority, admiration, sympathy, belonging, or power. Greene does not treat this as exceptional behavior. He sees it as built into social life. People manage impressions. They emphasize certain traits and hide others. They soften aggression with charm, conceal ambition behind modesty, disguise insecurity through arrogance, and present manipulation as concern. The danger lies in taking the surface too literally. Greene urges the reader to look for discrepancies. How does a person's tone compare with their words? How do their repeated actions compare with their stated values? How do they behave when they are frustrated, denied, or no longer performing for advantage? This is where the deeper self begins to show through. Greene is not telling us to become paranoid about everyone. He is telling us to become better observers. In real life, much damage comes from idealizing the mask and ignoring the underlying pattern. We trust too quickly because someone appears warm, insightful, or eloquent. We excuse contradictions because we prefer the version of them we want to believe in. Greene's lesson is that social intelligence requires patience. Character reveals itself gradually, especially when appearances are no longer easy to manage. One of the most practical insights in the book is Greene's emphasis on character over charm. He distinguishes between what a person projects in the moment and the deeper pattern of who they are over time. Character is not defined by isolated impressions. It reveals itself through consistency, especially under strain. How does a person handle frustration? How do they treat people beneath them in status? What happens when they are contradicted, blocked, embarrassed, or given power? Do they learn from setbacks or externalize blame? Do they show resilience or collapse into grievance? These repeated patterns matter far more than image. Greene suggests that many of life's worst misjudgments come from failing to study character carefully. We are seduced by confidence, eloquence, beauty, brilliance, or wounded vulnerability. We overlook the evidence of deeper tendencies because we prefer the immediate emotional impression. But character, in Greene's framework, is destiny. A person's unresolved insecurity, cruelty, vanity, impulsiveness, or need for control will eventually emerge, especially when life removes the conditions that kept it hidden. This is why Greene advises readers to study patterns slowly and seriously. Do not ask only what someone says. Ask what they repeatedly do. Do not ask what impression they make. Ask what structure of behavior is becoming visible. This shift from surface to pattern is one of the book's most important practical disciplines. Greene gives special attention to envy, which he sees as one of the most powerful and least acknowledged forces in human life. Envy is painful because it combines desire with humiliation. It is the suffering of seeing in another person what we want, what we lack, or what threatens our self-image. Because this feeling is difficult to admit, it usually appears indirectly. It may show up as criticism, coldness, moral superiority, minimization of another's success, or quiet satisfaction when they stumble. Greene's insight is that envy often arises not between people who are vastly different, but between those who are close in age, field, background, or aspiration. Similarity intensifies comparison. A stranger's success may impress us. A peer's success may wound us. This makes social and professional life more emotionally complex than it first appears. Support and admiration may be mixed with resentment. Praise may carry discomfort. Greene advises readers to understand this without bitterness. Success, talent, and independence often trigger reactions that people themselves do not fully understand. The practical lesson is to become more discerning about the emotional landscape around achievement. Not everyone close to us can comfortably bear our growth. Not every smile conceals goodwill. But Greene also turns the lesson inward. We too are vulnerable to envy, and the more honestly we face it, the less destructively it will operate from the shadows. The book does not sentimentalize human nature. Greene insists that there are darker drives in people that polite society often prefers to ignore. Aggression, cruelty, domination, passive sabotage, resentment, and vindictiveness are real. Some individuals, in his account, become chronically toxic. They thrive on conflict, manipulate through drama, externalize blame, create emotional instability, and leave others exhausted or disoriented. Greene urges readers to identify such people early because engagement often worsens the damage. One of his most strategic themes is distance. Not every difficult person is a villain, but some patterns are so persistent that hope, empathy, or patience become liabilities when they blind us to reality. The mature response may be containment, boundaries, or departure. This is one of the book's harder lessons because many people are trained to explain away red flags, to rescue, to tolerate, or to keep giving chances long after character has become visible. Greene's realism challenges that tendency. Understanding human nature means accepting that some people do not want harmony. Some want control. Some feed on emotional reaction. Some require enemies. Seeing this clearly is not cruelty. It is protection. Greene wants readers to stop mistaking chronic toxicity for complexity that can always be healed through goodwill. Another major subject in the laws of human nature is the influence of groups. Greene argues that individuals are highly vulnerable to collective emotion. In a crowd, an institution, a workplace, a political movement, or a close social circle, people often absorb the prevailing mood without realizing how much it shapes them. Certainty increases. Nuance weakens. Aggression finds cover. Doubt becomes harder to sustain. The group offers belonging, but it can also demand conformity. Greene is especially attentive to the way emotional contagion works. Excitement spreads. Panic spreads. Moral outrage spreads. Contempt spreads. Once a group identity hardens, individuals may begin to act in ways they would not endorse as solitary thinkers. This is a crucial insight because it explains how ordinary people become swept into bad decisions, ideological rigidity, or cruelty. Greene's answer is not antisocial withdrawal. It is inner distance. The strong individual learns to participate without dissolving entirely into the emotional field around them. They retain some private judgment. They notice the pressure to imitate, repeat, signal loyalty, or suppress discomfort. This capacity to remain slightly apart may be one of the rarest forms of strength, especially in moments when collective feeling is intense. Greene's warning is that people are never only individuals. They are also social imitators. Any account of human nature that ignores this is dangerously incomplete. Greene repeatedly returns to the idea that people are deeply concerned with status, whether or not they admit it openly. They want recognition. They want to feel respected, significant, and seen. This desire can express itself in obvious ambition, but also in sensitivity to slights, obsession with image, subtle dominance games, defensiveness around expertise, and exaggerated reactions to being ignored or diminished. Much of what looks like ideological conflict or personal incompatibility may, in Greene's reading, be a status struggle underneath. Someone is trying to preserve rank, prestige, authority, or self-importance. This does not make the struggle unreal. It makes it more psychologically understandable. Greene believes many people underestimate how much status concerns organize daily behavior. Once you start noticing it, patterns become clearer. Why was that comment taken so personally? Why did that collaboration turn competitive? Why did praise calm one person while exclusion inflamed another? The book encourages readers to stop imagining status as a superficial concern belonging only to the obviously vain. It is woven into human social life. The practical lesson is to handle status carefully, both in oneself and others. Needless humiliation creates enemies. Overinvestment in rank creates fragility. Mature power, in Greene's terms, comes partly from understanding this game without being fully consumed by it. Although much of the book examines weakness, blindness, and destructive tendency, Greene does not leave the reader in pessimism. One of his more constructive themes is purpose. People who lack direction, he suggests, become especially vulnerable to envy, distraction, resentment, status games, and emotional drift. They are too available to every slight, every comparison, every mood, and every social pressure. By contrast, a person with deeper purpose gains a stabilizing force. Their attention is not consumed entirely by how they are perceived. Their sense of value is not fully dependent on external validation. Their energy is gathered around a longer arc. Greene treats this as an antidote to many lower tendencies. Purpose does not eliminate human nature, but it organizes it. It channels ambition, calms restlessness, and makes pettiness less attractive. This is one of the book's more hopeful claims. Human beings are not condemned to remain reactive, vain, or blind. They can grow by orienting themselves around something larger than immediate ego maintenance. In that sense, self-mastery is not only suppression of impulse. It is devotion to something that makes smaller impulses less powerful. A recurring lesson in Greene's work is that many of our greatest mistakes come from projection. We want people to be more loyal, more consistent, more transparent, and more self-aware than they really are. We confuse charm with goodness, intensity with depth, vulnerability with sincerity, and talent with integrity. We believe what flatters our hopes. This leaves us exposed. Greene urges the reader to practice a more difficult realism. See people as they are, not as you wish they would be. This means noticing contradiction without rushing to explain it away. It means accepting that many people are mixtures of warmth and selfishness, insight and vanity, generosity and hidden resentment. Mature perception does not demand purity. It demands clarity. Greene's broader point is that realistic perception is less painful in the long run than sustained illusion. The truth may disappoint, but fantasy disarms us. To understand human nature is to become less desperate for comforting simplifications. That does not make the world colder. It makes our footing in it more secure. If we distill Greene's practical method, it comes down to a disciplined way of moving through the world. Observe before reacting. Pause before concluding. Look for patterns instead of isolated incidents. Reflect on the emotional currents beneath visible behavior. Apply the same scrutiny inward. This method sounds simple, but it is demanding because it runs against many natural tendencies. People want quick certainty, flattering stories, emotional release, and immediate trust or rejection. Greene asks for something slower and more exacting. He asks for perception trained by patience. The reward is fewer illusions, fewer unnecessary conflicts, better judgment of character, better timing, more awareness of one's own weaknesses. This does not guarantee perfect wisdom, but it creates a more strategic and realistic relationship with life. The person who practices this discipline becomes harder to deceive, harder to provoke, and less likely to sabotage themselves through blindness. If we gather the central lessons of the book into a concise form, they would sound like this. First, people are more emotional and less self-aware than they usually appear. Second, self-knowledge is essential because the same forces we detect in others operate in us. Third, emotional self-control is one of the most important forms of strength. Fourth, narcissism is widespread, and empathy is both a moral and strategic counterweight. Fifth, social masks are real, so patterns matter more than impressions. Sixth, envy, status concern, and resentment quietly shape much of human behavior. Seventh, some people are chronically toxic, and distance is often wiser than engagement. Eighth, group emotion can overwhelm individual judgment, so inner independence matters. Ninth, purpose helps protect against pettiness and reactivity. And finally, the ability to see people as they are is one of life's greatest advantages. These lessons are demanding because they ask readers to abandon innocence without abandoning humanity. Greene is not asking for cynicism alone. He is asking for honest perception. The enduring force of the laws of human nature lies in its seriousness about seeing. Robert Greene does not promise a world in which people become simple, pure, or fully rational. He offers something harder and more useful. He offers a way of looking at human beings without the comforting blur of wishful thinking. That way of looking begins with the recognition that emotion, ego, insecurity, ambition, envy, and social pressure shape more of life than most people admit. It continues with the willingness to apply that recognition inward, not just outward. And it culminates in a kind of sober freedom. When you see more clearly, You are less easily manipulated by appearances, less shocked by contradiction, less vulnerable to your own reactive impulses, and more capable of choosing your responses wisely. In that sense, Greene's book is ultimately about power through perception. Not domination through force, but strength through understanding. Human nature cannot be removed from the world. It cannot be removed from us. But it can be studied. It can be anticipated. It can be directed. And perhaps that is the book's final challenge. To live not blindly, not naively, and not bitterly, but with eyes open.